Okay, so today we're going to dive right into a pretty big story that broke just recently.
Right.
It's Steve Bannon and this guilty plea to felony fraud.
Yeah, a first-degree felony.
First degree, right.
Uh,
Yeah. So, I mean, I think a lot of people want to know kind of what's the gist here, what's the big deal, without having to wade through, tons and tons of coverage.
right, tons of articles.
So that's our mission today, to kind of give you the core of this story and why it matters.
Absolutely. And this deep dive really revolves around this We Build the Wall Foundation,
Right, right.
this fundraising effort that brought in a huge amount of money, over $15 million,
Wow, yeah.
with this, stated goal of building a wall along the U.S.-Mexico border.
Right. And I think what makes this whole thing even more interesting is that this plea comes after,
Yeah.
a lot
Yeah.
of previous legal wrangling and public statements from Bannon about this.
Absolutely. It really adds another layer to it.
So let's start with this guilty plea, because I think that's what really caught a lot of people's attention. Can you just take us through exactly what happened in the courtroom?
Sure. So Steve Bannon, he pleaded guilty to one state felony count of a scheme to defraud in the first degree,
Okay.
which, yeah, I mean, it was kind of a surprise, especially because he had been saying he was going to fight this, really hard in court.
Yeah, he was coming out swinging, wasn't he?
Yeah, he even said, we'll use every tool in the toolbox to fight this, and then suddenly this guilty plea.
Mhm.
So it definitely makes you wonder what changed.
It does. Yeah. So what was the reaction like in the courtroom when this happened?
Well, one thing that stood out was the prosecutor, Jeffrey Levinson.
Okay.
He announced that there would be no restitution in this particular state case,
Okay.
because Bannon's co-defendants in a related federal case had already returned millions of dollars to the donors.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So they
All right.
honored
Wait, so
that.
in this specific case, it wasn't about the money.
Gotcha.
And then, the judge asked Bannon directly if he had engaged in this scheme to defraud. And his answer was just, yes, Your Honor. Wow, just a straightforward admission.
Straightforward.
So for anyone who's not, super familiar with all the ins and outs of this case, can you break down what exactly this scheme that he admitted to was all about?
Yeah, so basically the charges revolve around this allegation that Bannon and others involved in We Build the Wall made false promises to the people who were donating money.
Okay.
They specifically said that none of that money would be used to pay the salary of one of the organization's founders.
Oh, so they were saying it was all going directly to the wall.
Exactly, all going to the cause.
Hmm.
And they raised a lot of money on that premise, like over $15 million.
So that's really the heart of the issue, is this alleged lie about where the money was going.
Right, the misuse of those funds.
Now, we've also heard about, previous legal action related to this whole We Build the Wall thing.
Yeah.
So how do these state charges that he just pleaded guilty to connect to the bigger picture?
Right. So it's important to understand that these charges were brought by the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, specifically by Alvin Bragg.
Huh?
And this came after a federal indictment back in 2020,
Right.
which was also about this We Build the Wall fundraising.
Okay. So same basic issue, but different levels of the legal system.
Exactly. Different jurisdictions.
And this is where it gets even more complicated, because there was that presidential pardon involved, right?
Exactly. In 2021,
Right.
Trump pardoned Bannon for those federal charges before leaving office.
So does that mean he was off the hook completely?
Not quite, because a presidential pardon only applies to federal crimes.
Oh, okay.
It doesn't affect state-level charges at all.
So the Manhattan DA could still go after him even with the pardon.
Exactly, and that's what happened.
That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, it highlights the difference between the two systems.
It does. So after this guilty plea, did the DA make any kind of statement?
Yeah, Alvin Bragg put out a statement saying that this guilty plea basically achieves their main goal,
Okay.
which is to protect New Yorkers' charities and charitable giving from fraud.
So he's really emphasizing the importance of cracking down on this kind of thing.
Absolutely. He stressed that the state is committed to rooting out fraud in their markets, corporations and charities.
And what about Bannon himself? Did he say anything after the hearing about taking responsibility for his actions, or, expressing any kind of regret?
Well, not exactly. His public statements actually focused on something else entirely.
Oh, really? Like what?
He called for criminal investigations into Alvin Bragg, the DA, and Letitia James, the New York Attorney General,
Oh, wow.
saying that they'd acted improperly towards Trump. So it seems like he's still framing this whole thing as a political attack.
It doesn't sound like he's backing down at all.
Not at all.
So we've talked about this guilty plea, but it's important to remember this isn't Bannon's first run-in with the law, right?
No, this is actually his second criminal conviction.
Right. He had that whole thing with the January 6th committee.
Exactly. He was convicted of contempt of Congress for refusing to comply with the subpoena.
Right. And he actually served time for that.
He did. He got a 4-month federal prison sentence and was released in November.
So this isn't exactly his first rodeo with the legal system.
No, definitely not.
So given this latest guilty plea and his previous conviction, what kind of sentence is he looking at this time around?
Well, this is where it gets interesting.
Okay.
He was sentenced to a 3-year conditional discharge.
Okay, so what does that actually mean?
It means he won't serve any more prison time.
Wow.
And he also doesn't have to pay restitution as part of this plea deal.
So basically, he pleaded guilty to felony fraud, but won't see the inside of a cell or have to pay back the money?
Basically, yeah.
So how does that work? What exactly is a conditional discharge?
It basically means he's been found guilty, but as long as he doesn't commit another crime within a certain period of time, he won't face any further penalties for this specific charge.
Huh. So he's kind of on probation in a way.
In a sense, yeah.
So no additional jail time, no restitution for a guilty plea to felony fraud, even with a prior conviction. I think a lot of people are going to be wondering if that's really holding him accountable for his actions.
Yeah, I think that's a fair question.
It seems like a pretty light sentence.
It does, and some analysts have pointed out that this outcome seems out of step with sentences in other white-collar crime cases.
Right. So is there a different standard for someone like Bannon?
That's a question worth asking.
It definitely makes you think about what justice really means in these high-profile cases.
Absolutely, and whether the consequences actually match the harm that was done.
So to sum it all up, Steve Bannon pleaded guilty to felony fraud in connection with this We Build the Wall effort.
Right.
Where they raised over $15 million based on what prosecutors say were false pretenses.
Exactly. And this all played out against the backdrop of that previous federal pardon.
Which highlights how the state and federal legal systems can operate independently.
Right. They have their own separate powers.
And despite this guilty plea and his prior conviction, Bannon isn't going to serve any more time in prison or have to pay back any of the money in this specific case.
Right. Just that conditional discharge.
So we've looked at all the different angles here, the legal back and forth, the details of the alleged scheme, and the reactions to this plea, especially Bannon's insistence that this is all politically motivated.
Absolutely. It's a complex case with lots of moving parts.
But hopefully this deep dive has given you a clear picture of what's going on without getting bogged down in all the details.
That's our goal, to make these complex stories accessible.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So for you, the listener, thinking about all this, what does this case tell us about how the legal system handles high-profile figures who commit financial crimes?
Right. Is there a different standard for them?
And what does this whole situation mean for the public's trust in charitable giving?
Especially when it's tied to political agendas.
It's something to consider. The implications go beyond just this one case.
They really do.
It raises questions about accountability and how we ensure that justice is served.
It definitely makes you think.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Absolutely.
We'll be back soon with another look at the news you need to know.
See you then.